anybody want to talk about Afghanistan, COVID, or Albany?
Oh my
I
God.
will say the streaming on YouTube is starting imminently, so.
Maybe after the meeting's over.
Oh, one thing we might talk about is the next meeting is scheduled for Yom Kippur. So,
Well, I'm sure.
Oh, we should fix that.
yes.
Because I like you folks, but not that much.
You like Yom Kippur better?
Who likes
I feel
Yom
like it's an
Kippur?
underrated holiday. I feel like it gets a lot of shit, but it's a really nice holiday, actually.
Well, I suppose if one has a lot for which to atone. I've never known this group to be so quiet.
So much
Yeah.
is going on.
We're plotting.
Not the overthrow of the club's leadership, I hope.
Yeah.
We'll give it just a couple more minutes also. We'll wait for
Yeah, we can't start without
Krueger
Jerry.
to show us. Well, Jerry's not coming tonight, actually.
Oh,
so
Jerry's
we-
not coming. Well, then we will start
We
without
can't.
Jerry.
start without
Okay.
Jerry, yeah.
I forgot about
this
that.
Isn't it's a club event, but it's not a club meeting. So we have one agenda item in it to do this forum.
I thought Jerry was back from vacation on the 16th.
He is, but it's his daughter's birthday tonight.
No, that's a reasonable excuse. If I had a daughter, I would want to claim her birthday as an excuse.
Absolutely.
You might consider it anyway.
We're live, Gabe. So no rush, but all set whenever we have all the participants.
Great. I think Liz is joining. So we'll just give it.
Yeah, there she is.
Where are the remnants of Fred that we were supposed to have?
All right. We have everybody here. So Alex, is there a way to mute everybody who's not spotlighted right now? Every time I do that, I mute myself.
It will mute everyone, but the spotlighted people can unmute
Cool.
themselves. So I'll push
All
the
right.
button now.
Thank you. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here for a special non-meeting meeting of the For Freedom's Democratic Club. My name is Gabriel Panic. I'm on the board of the club, and I'm very excited that we are having this forum tonight to talk about an issue that is really important, I know, to a lot of us, and rare for a Albany inside baseball issue really seeped into the consciousness of the broader populace in our city, given the events of the past couple months. So I'm really excited to drill down on it and learn more about this issue and how we can all do more about it from our speakers. First, I will introduce both of our speakers in a minute, but so I'll leave you in a little bit of suspense, but just a few housekeeping notes. First, Jerry, I don't think could make it tonight. Jerry Ferguson is the president of the For Freedom's Democratic Club, but he wanted to make sure I thank everybody for coming, and especially our speakers for being here on behalf of the club. I also wanted to thank all of our co-sponsors. We thought this would be a great opportunity to work together with some other political organizations in the neighborhood. We didn't want to hog this all to ourselves, so I don't know who is on, but I just wanted to thank our co-sponsors from the East River Democratic Club, UES Progressive, and a number of district leaders and state committee members from the 68th Assembly District, William Smith, who worked very closely with me on putting this together, Honorable Tamika Mapp, Peggy Morales, John Ruiz, Therese DeBoos, and Eddie Gibbs. So thank you to all of you for co-sponsoring and spreading the word about this event tonight. One last housekeeping thing I would say, we're going to keep the chat open. Given that this isn't a meeting, we're here for a forum, I think we should try to limit the chat, so everybody can really focus on what our speakers are saying. Not that normally we shouldn't focus on what our speakers are saying, but it feels like this is a good opportunity maybe to not do so much chatting. But of course, we will take questions from the broader group towards the in the later part of our program, and the chat will be a great place to put your questions. So if you do have questions, you can put them there. But I think, maybe keep the friendly chatting to a minimum. We will hang out here a little bit afterwards. There's been some talk of going to the backyard at Rice Tavern afterwards. It's outside. It's on 92nd between 1st and 2nd. So stick around afterwards and we can talk about whether or not we'll do that. But for now, I am going to introduce our speakers. And I'm going to moderate tonight because why not? I'm on a New York City Bar Association committee. We've talked about the Board of Elections, so, I'm vaguely qualified to do that. But we're very excited. So Joanna Zdanys, she's a counsel in the democracy program at the Brennan Center at NYU Law School. Okay, everybody please mute yourselves. The cab drivers in this club, please put your phones on mute. So Joanna works at the Brennan Center, where she does work on money in politics and election reform. She has testified about Board of Elections reform in the past and has written extensively about good governance in New York and elsewhere. State Senator Liz Krueger is our state senator. Well, is most of our state senator for the Upper East Side and Midtown East. She is chair of the Finance Committee, and she is the lead sponsor on one of the many bills co-sponsored with Nili Rozek in the Assembly, one of the many bills for election reform. And are very excited to have both of you. So the first question I'm going to put to Joanna, and this will be a conversation, but we'll have some questions to kick us off. So either of you, jump in and please just talk. But Joanna, what went wrong in the June elections?
So before I dive into that, I just wanted to say thank you to the club for the invitation to speak tonight. And I also, of course, want to recognize my co-panelist or co-forum speaker, co-Zoomer, Senator Krueger, for her leadership on the issue of Board of Elections reform. You've really been such a tireless advocate for such an important topic, and I'm really glad to be here speaking with you tonight. So as Gabriel said, I'm counsel at the Brennan Center for Justice, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit law and policy institute. And one of the issues that we've long been trying to tackle is BOE reform. So really excited to speak about it today after a lot of work trying to dig into what the issues are with the BOE. And so, Gabriel, you asked, what happened with ranked choice voting? And, I think the way to approach it is to really pull back and see it as a symptom of a larger problem at the BOE. So in case anyone missed it, I think this is a very well-informed and plugged-in group. But on June 29th, about a week after the city primary, it came to light that 135,000 test ballots were incorrectly included with a preliminary count in the mayoral primary. And so those test ballots had not been cleared from the tabulation system according to protocol before the actual tabulation was wrong. And so the problem here is really like, it's not about the test ballots themselves. It's not a problem with ranked choice voting. It's the fact that year after year and election after election, we've just come to expect that something is going to go wrong with some aspect of how our city's elections are run. And, you know, thanks to fail safes in our system, it was caught quickly. I think I'm very confident that we have backups in the system, like paper ballots that ensure the accuracy of our elections, but it speaks to larger systemic issues. And before I get into those issues, I want to talk a little bit about the stakes that are just involved every time something goes wrong with our elections. You know, first of all, New York City is the second largest elections jurisdiction in the United States. It serves 5.5 million registered voters, which is more voters than most states in the United States have. And it also serves more than 41% of the state's voters. So we're talking about a lot of voices that, first of all, need to be heard in the system, voters who need to be served, whose right to participate in their democracy is at risk when major issues like this come to light. I also want to pull back a little bit and think about the national importance of mistakes like this that happen. You know, we're living in the era of the big lie, where those who are questioning the integrity of our elections across the country, we see, you know, the audits that are happening in Arizona, for example, and in other parts of the country, really latch on to issues like this that come up in New York. And it becomes sort of cover for promoting regressive voting policies. And so the stakes for reforming the Board of Elections really cannot be overstated. This is an issue for New York City's voters. This is an issue for New York State's voters. And it's also an issue for the state of our democracy across the country. I don't think it's an exaggeration to make that claim. And so, you know, I want to just quickly say, you know, we've been taking a deep dive and trying to get to the root of the issues. And why can't the BOE do better? There are, you know, other large elections jurisdictions that serve comparably large and comparably diverse groups of voters. And yet, when we peel back the layers and look at what the issues are with how the BOE runs, compared to other parts of the country, there are just so many structural dysfunctions in terms of how the board is composed, the size of the board, how staff is hired, how people come to their positions of power at the BOE, how members are removed. And yeah, I see the comment here that this is nothing new. You know, this is not rocket science. And yet this is an issue that with every passing election and every passing mistake that happens really demands greater attention and really peeling back the layers of why the BOE continues to be dysfunctional. And, you know, right now the Brennan Center, I said, has been studying this issue for a long time. I want to put on folks' radars that in the next month or so, we'll be issuing a report that really looks at the BOE structural dysfunctions within the national context, comparing it to other jurisdictions, looking at what lessons can we take from elsewhere, and why are there just, you know, fundamental sort of no-brainer practices that do not happen at the BOE that could really go a long way to improve how our elections are run in our city. So I'm happy to go deeper into the weeds, but I do want to stop there because I know we have a lot of questions and a lot to talk about tonight. But, I'm glad during our conversation over the next hour and change to get into some of those findings and what some of our recommendations are.
Yeah, so thank you. That was a great overview of the state of play and a lot of the really important issues that are, at stake here, and especially how they've come up recently. Senator Krueger,
Hi.
can you give us a sense of I know there was a similar event on Tuesday by the New York Democratic Lawyers Council. I did not attend it because I didn't want to be swayed by the questions they asked. So I hope, this goes as well as I'm sure that event did.
So actually a number of people on the screen I'm seeing were there. So you can correct me from then, or you can say, well, this other person brought that up then, and that was a good point. So first off, thank you for inviting me. I always enjoy when Four Freedoms has me present. And, Zoom is a fine way to be doing it nowadays. It keeps you all safer. Lots of people look very comfortable on their couches. John Wagner is comfortably leaning against American flag. I'm not sure whether you're supposed to lean. You'll have to talk to others about that. And this sounds ridiculous because, yes, of course the Board of Election is dysfunctional. And of course things went wrong this election, because every election that we go into, about 3 weeks before the election, I actually start to have this recurring dream, what's going to go wrong this time? Because it's always a what, not an if. And maybe no matter where I lived in this country, that would be the case. So I'm very looking forward to the Brennan Center report comparing what's going on around the country. I have found the Brennan Center reports invaluable for exactly that purpose over many years in government. Let's see what other people are doing right and wrong, because it turns out a lot of things in government are wrong, and yet somehow, with glue and paste and people with a sense of civic responsibility, we mostly figure it out anyway. But it is absolutely true that because of a combination of, I think, what our Constitution requires or doesn't allow us to do, what various parties have always thought advantaged them or disadvantaged the other, I'll get back to that in a minute, and through a concept called, patronage, you've ended up with a really bad mix of storylines that is the model for New York City and state boards of election. Now, having said that, I also want to say there are some fantastic people who work for the Board of Election and go in every day and try to do their best and then somehow manage to survive each of these nightmare election days. And if I think I'm having anxiety dreams about their jobs for 3 weeks going into each election, I can't even imagine what people who work there who do know what they're doing, what their anxiety dreams are. But one of the points that one of them made to me recently is, you tell me another place on earth that has to jump to have 40,000 employees for basically 3 days a year, but then you never see them again. And they don't have to have any accountability to you. You don't have to have any accountability to them. And you go from 0 to 40,000 overnight. And that is a real issue, by the way, that creates problems at each election, and does tie right back to the excellent work that our district leaders do and our political clubs do. When we had the first of our hearings around Board of Election problems 3 weeks ago, I'm going to say in Brooklyn now, it was the first one. There's a series of them going on. You can live stream them. We had district leaders coming and telling us that when they got to their polling sites and they saw that there was supposed to be 17 workers there were 6. And when they go, where are the rest? They would be told, well, that's all that showed up. That's what we got. Well, how do you run a poll site with 6 people if you were scheduled to have 17 there? And so a couple of the district leaders, and I'm just throwing this out there because I see Kim and I see others here that I think I saw Meryl on the screen before also. So this district leader from Brooklyn, I forget her name, said, oh, and she was at the hearing, but she was also at the event the other day. It was her or someone else. Anyway, she just realized I need people. So she called up her friends and said, you have to come here and work today. And they would say, but I'm not trained as a poll worker. And she'd go, I don't care. I'll show you what to do when you get here. This is an election. We need people to work the polls. You're my friend. You believe in your civic responsibility. And you're going to come down here and work. And she got them to show up, like 12 or 13 of them. But they hadn't been trained as poll workers, which is a little bit iffy. And I was like, and did they get paid? She goes, yeah, there's a way to do an emergency process to pay them at the end of the day. And I'm thinking, wow, she showed a lot of initiative. And it was her commitment to making sure the election got done. And at the same time, when I'm saying the sentence, so she just pulled people off the street who were her friends and said, you run this poll. I would think Joanna and the lawyers would be going, excuse me, time out. That is not how we're allowed to do things. But I was happy to hear that she was so innovative and serious about why it didn't matter anything else. We just had to make sure that when people showed up to vote, they would have the ability to vote. Because shit happens all the time, poll site by poll site, election by election. And we are really, I just want to make clear, the Senate Dems are very serious about wanting to fix problems. We have passed an arm-filled of election bills in the last 2 years as we've been in the majority, and most of them have been to House and most of them have been signed by the outgoing governor. Thank you as you leave for signing some of the right bills. And I think that some of them are helping really move us in the right direction. At the same time, I've had Board of Election people say to me, do you know what it means when you change 7 major rules for the Board of Elections and tell us, and now you're running election under those rules, and by the way, the election is 30 days from now? And I also get that when you try to make a lot of changes all at the same time, to a system that's not as flexible as you would hope, that you may have also created new problems, at least temporarily. So when your first question, Gabe, was, so what went wrong this June? My response, even though I was up for 3 weeks in advance worrying about what was going to go wrong, was, oh my God, that worked. We moved into ranked choice voting. And it worked. The majority of people figured it out. They even said they liked it. We got more people to come out and vote. I know lots of people, including people who are here, aren't totally happy with how the outcomes came out. And thank you all for your service and for being such excellent candidates. But we turned around the entire way we do elections here. And it really did work. And everyone was telling me it won't work in communities where people don't speak English. Well, that wasn't true. It won't work in communities of color. They won't come out and vote. Well, that wasn't true. Nobody will go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They'll all screw it up. Well, that wasn't true. So I know the city council has some folks working to potentially reverse ranked choice voting, but I'm saying out loud, come on, folks, we did this. It actually worked pretty damn well. We should not be reversing ourselves. The people spoke and said they wanted to try this. They tried this. I think if we did that same question vote for people now, we'd have more people in favor of it. And it also shows when the Board of Election is really focused on something and gets enough support and help and backing and pressure to do it right, they actually can. So yeah, they screwed up that count with 135,000 test votes that should never have been in the actual vote. And so shame on them. But because they had a transparent enough system, I think it was just people counting who called up and said, this doesn't add up, people, you're doing something wrong. So it was just citizens going, no, 2 + 2 does not equal 6. Go back and try again. And they could very quickly figure out what they did wrong and fix it. That doesn't excuse them for having made the mistake. And it reinforces to me, more transparency is better, because the more people can watch and see and ask questions, the more likelihood is that we do get things right. There's certainly a guarantee of less likelihood of people attempting fraud or successfully attempting fraud. And I also think it's really, really important, both on thinking through how we change the Board of Election, how we professionalize it, how we balance out the structural tensions of partisanship and patronage, that we have to keep it transparent and open enough to actual people that they give a damn. So some people think if we automate everything and we take the humans out of it completely, then we don't have to worry about partisanship and patronage. And I think that the strongest part about our election system in the United States, for all of its warts, is that there is an understanding of civic responsibility and mutual civic responsibility through the process of voting and through having a legitimate electoral process. And if you make it another software game, I think you would risk really losing that. So I'm not saying that I'm totally opposed to a mail-in system. I'm not. Online voting makes me very, very nervous for all kinds of hacking concerns. But I also really worry that we lose the sense of duty and responsibility to voting, which is one of the other things I liked so much about ranked choice. Not only to get more people involved in running and working on all these more campaigns and talking about it all the time, but it also reinforced that, hey, this is something communities do because it matters and it's real and it has real impacts on anything that happens in government. And I do worry that you can turn everything into computerized bells and whistles, but then people will stop voting. And I will just use as one example, another place you'll think, okay, Liz is crazy, but I read a book in college, and that was 100 years ago, and it was called, oh gosh, what was it called? One second, this is that. It was by a social policy analyst named Richard Titmuss, and it was called The Blood Relationship. And it was comparing the British system of blood donation to the American system of blood donation. You're thinking, what is she talking about? And here's what the book showed. The British system of blood donation was based on civic responsibility to each other. That you needed to donate blood because everybody needed to donate blood because people need blood, and sometimes it'll be you, and sometimes it'll be your neighbor, and sometimes it'll be your child. But what you do because it's the right thing is you donate blood. The American system was set up, you donate so that you have it there for you when you need it. You donate because we pay you for it. Remember, we used to pay for blood. And you know what? The American system was so much worse than the British system because we forgot to build into our system that, like voting, donating blood is something you do for your community because it's needed and that we all need each other. And I think that despite the fact that it doesn't show up in legislative language, that really what we need is a reinforcement of the messaging that we do this because we all need each other, and election days, are sort of the make it or break it for democracy. And so I'm basically talking to all of you younger people who now will have the responsibility of keeping all of us functioning in this world together and keeping people being willing to go and work elections, because that's the other issue we see in elections. You see people who are 60 and 70 and 80 years old, still willing to show up every election and work 16 and 17-hour days for bupkis, not because of the check, but because they believe in the civic responsibility of why this is so important. And if we're not translating that to the next generations, you're going to have a much bigger problem than does the Board of Election count 135,000 votes incorrectly. We won't have anybody at these polling sites to help you vote, and we won't get elections done. So I do have, among many other bills I co-sponsor, a bill that would redesign the New York City Board of Election. Some people like it. I am 100% open to edits and changes, so I am very excited. Brennan Center, faster than later, please get me a copy of that report so I can see what else we can learn. Some people are saying we have to do it statewide. You can't just do New York City, and it doesn't mean I don't think we should make changes statewide, but I wasn't sure I would live long enough to get a statewide version done, because for every person who agrees, there are 5 people who don't agree on these issues. And I thought, okay, if we could just get the city board changed and fixed, maybe the rest of the boards will go, oh, that wasn't so bad. Let's try that too. So that's why I started out with just the city board of elections. And yes, a lot of things people want, and I agree with, would require constitutional amendment. And I am fine with that. I do not see these as contradictory. If we make changes in statute now that help, and then we come along with a constitutional amendment that goes so much further, that's fine, because constitutional amendments take at minimum 3 years, and I've lived to see them take longer than a decade. And so I keep thinking we can try to do better before the next election or before the election after that. So I don't do away with partisan control. That would require a constitutional amendment. Oh, I have one friend, who thinks it doesn't, but I'm not sure that's correct. We do require the co-directors 1D, 1R to meet actual qualifications for the job. We do require education and testing for the people who have specific jobs, not unlike other government agencies that you might work for. We do require that we can't do away with the commissioners. We might be able to change the number of them, because 10 is an awful big group, but we can put them more into an advisory structure than we are the policy deciders and we tell the staff what to do in addition to hiring and firing. We allow that the elected officials of the city, the mayor, controller, and speaker of the city council, do the hiring and firing of the two co-executive directors, and then the these county leaders of the Democrat and Republican Party can pick the commissioners, but the commissioners have a different role and a lesser role for operating the board than they currently do. I'm trying to think other key issues here. There's lots of discussion, and I'm not sure it will go into my bill, but I'm very open to discussions of it, of who should be deciding major purchase issues such as new voting machines. There are groups that are very, very concerned about the casualness by which commissioners at some boards of elections seem to be willing to make their decisions about the voting machines based on lobbying by the voting machine companies, as opposed to specific standards set up, put out through an RFP, and seeing what companies come forward with machines that meet the standards we believe need to be in our voting system. There's discussion about what role the state count committee should play versus versus county boards. I don't touch that with my bill, but there's certainly room for that discussion also. And then there's even discussion of should we have, instead of a state board of election, should we have something like that some other states have where the Secretary of State or another independently elected person is responsible for the elections? Because apparently there's some results of somebody's study, Joanne, you're gonna take it from me here, that you get better outcomes in states where the Secretary of State runs the Board of Elections. I don't know if that's true or that's rumor, but that's what I have been told. I don't love making the Secretary of State in charge of elections here because the governor chooses the Secretary of State. They're not independently elected. So depending on who was going to be the governor, I'm not sure I would want them really in charge completely of the election process. But if it was an independently elected entity that was then responsible for elections and the system and the things that we did, maybe that is a reasonable approach, but I think that may also take a constitutional change, because I don't think the legislature can, through statute, create a new additional statewide elected position. I'm pretty sure we need to go to the Constitution for that. I'm going to stop if I've gone too long, Gabe. Thank you.
No, thank you, Senator. Yeah, I do. I think this is a good place to ask. So, Joanna, it seems like there's disagreement even over what the state constitution has to say. So I thought, tell us, what does it say? What can we do? What can we not do? But as Senator Krueger just said, maybe there's a little bit of room for debate about that. So what do you think?
Yeah, and before I get into that, I did want to lift up a few points that the senator had made that I think are really. One of those is just the point that there are many people who are working within the system that we have right now, employees of the boards of elections, employees of the New York City Board of Elections, who work tirelessly around the clock. We see people working like 7 days a week, late nights in the run up to elections. And there are stakes for them too, and there are equities too, and there are morale issues, of course, when you're working to move the channels of our democracy forward and you're operating within a structure that's by design going to hinder those efforts. So I do want to echo the senator's point that we can't paint with a broad brush about who's working at the BOE, but there are certainly points to be made and fixes that should be implemented about the routes to getting employed at the board, the routes to leadership. And I think that those are really important issues to tackle. Also, as for the issue of the size of the board that the senator raised, I think that that is a really important point, and one that the Brennan Center, just to preview one of our recommendations, thinks really should be tackled. The Board of Elections is composed, as I'm sure lots of folks on this call know, because you all seem to be very experienced and attuned to what these issues are, 10 members across 5 counties, 2 from each county, from each party. And, I talked a bit about our national research before, and when we compared New York City to the 15 largest elections jurisdictions with multi-member boards, nobody else has a board that's unwieldy. Most have a board that's sized between 3 and 5 commissioners. And so that is certainly something that, first of all, merits serious consideration. The Brennan Center recommends reducing the size of the board, but also is something that can be done by state statute. The size of the New York City Board of Elections is not enshrined in the state constitution. That's a matter of state law. And as for, what the best model is to move to, it's a question that merits close attention and debate. There, I think, is no one size fits all solution for election administration. You know, we've seen dysfunction with the system that we have here in New York, but there are also very high profile examples of other states across the country that operate under a Secretary of State model that have had significant problems with voter disenfranchisement as well. So I know that may not be a satisfying answer in that, you know.
I'm just open to all ideas to make it better.
Yeah, well, and we look forward to continuing to study and think through that particular issue. But Gabriel, as to your question about what the state constitution requires, there are a couple of points to lift up there. One is that the state constitution requires bipartisan representation on all elections boards, so securing equal numbers of the two major political parties. So now the Democratic and Republican Party, the two parties that got the most votes essentially in the last election. And it also requires that boards be appointed on the nomination of representatives of the two major political parties. And so there's an important line in the state constitution that says, as the legislature may direct. And that's something that I want to lift up as sort of a theme for thinking through initial steps for reforming how our elections are run in New York, because I think that very often the state constitution is cited to as the ultimate impediment to reform. But as Senator Krueger is showing, you know, through her legislation, there are a lot of steps that can be taken within the current parameters that the state constitution sets forth that would still make a meaningful step forward in improving how our elections are run. And some of those include, first of all, you know, we've already mentioned considering reducing the size of the board, the number of commissioners overall. There's nothing in the state constitution that says that you cannot impose training requirements on commissioners and executive staff. That's something that currently does not exist in state law and is something, you know, when we talk about our national review of how other jurisdictions are conducting elections, other states require that, you know, whether it's 60 days after appointment or within 6 months of appointment, that the people who are running our elections go through some minimal training, that they understand the federal and state laws that govern the job that they are appointed to do to serve the public. Also, there's nothing that says you can't have minimal qualifications ahead of time to have a passing interest in election law or voting rights before you take on this job. You know, currently the requirements for being a commissioner on any board of elections in New York State is that you're a registered member of your respective party in your county and that you do not hold and are not running for elected office. So there's more that can be done there. And, you know, going down the line, you know, the focus need not just be on the leadership of our boards of elections, and specifically for purposes of today's conversation, the New York City Board of Elections, but, you know, there's the open secret in New York City is that jobs are not publicly posted. Like, that's a huge issue for transparency, for assuring public confidence in who's getting in the door. And there's nothing stopping a requirement saying, you know, the boards need to not just hire behind closed doors, but actually put their job postings out there with minimal qualifications. This is something that is a well-established best practice across the United States. And I know this is something that the senator's bill tackles head on. Those are just a few of the recommendations that I think would go a long way to helping with professionalism and transparency at the board that in no way are impeded by the requirements of the state constitution.
So at one of the hearings, Joanna, I just want to say that one of the testifiers said, okay, I get it. Boards of elections are filled with patronage and nepotism. Can't we just have qualified friends and family get the job? That's not going to be the language in my bill, but it did make me laugh. Like, yes, let's aim for qualified friends and family. So.
Yeah, that's really incredible. And, you know, another issue is along with that, you know, with the lack of transparency around who is filling the seats, one best practice that other comparably large jurisdictions do, you know, Los Angeles, Maricopa County, Arizona, Harris County, Texas, where Houston is, some of the other largest jurisdictions in the country, like they conduct national searches for their top staff. You know, the current head of elections for LA County was brought over from Washington State, where he was running elections at the state level and had done county level work before that. But I think, you know, it could very well be the case that the best person for a job is working down the hall, but how will you know unless you're really taking a look at people who are out there who are committed to running elections and committed through their careers to serving voters.
Senator Krueger, I mean, so you are one of the leading voices on reform in sort of all aspects of political life in the state. I think we all sort of think that. I mean, what do you think? And as honest as you can be, I mean, what are the chances of advancing a bill? You know, again, it's not about totally upending the political system in place because that's set by the state constitution and other things. But I mean, what are the chances of a bill like yours or one similar to it getting through in the next legislative session?
You know, I'm actually pretty optimistic about my bill. And that's because even though New York City is, you know, like other cities, a place with fiefdoms that are politically controlled, and we call them boroughs, and we each have our own borough leaders. I know that I reached out to legislators who are also the county leaders of their party, and so far, 2 of them have told me that they support the bill. The Brooklyn leader, Michelle, and Jamal Bailey in the Bronx. So, you know, it doesn't mean that everybody's going to support it, but I actually think when I can say, no, even the people who are in charge of setting up the systems the way they are now want to see these changes, that's a really sort of serious step to move forward with. So I do actually think that there is maybe this is the moment where people realize, you know, this model isn't working. They, as county leaders, get crap for it. You know, for the good and the bad right now, depending on who you're, I mean, I'm in a Democratic club, and I said the good and the bad, there are not that many Republicans to make that much noise, either in the city of New York or in either house of the legislature. So even if they want to make noise, I don't think they can stop a vote that can actually prevent this bill from passing both houses. I do not know what Carl Heastie's position is, so I can't speak for him, and I never would, and we have to go ask assembly members. But I know that my leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, is very open to election reform. and is at least off the record said, yes, we could do Westchester next, please. So, and Westchester Board of Election, by the way, been a pretty big problem if you look at the history of it. So, you know, we have a mayor who's outgoing who says he's very supportive of it. I'm not sure that matters so much anymore to anyone, but I'm glad that he's supportive of it. I will highlight, you know, with all the problems that the Board of Election has, one thing you can point out is that Mayor de Blasio kept saying, what do you need? Do you need more money to hire more people, to get more machines, to get more whatever? He kept offering, and the Board of Election didn't take him up on it. It's the only time in the history of the country a government agent has said, no thanks, we don't need the money. So that was sort of fascinating also. But I really do think that we might have hit a good moment in history to actually get this done. And again, while we're not going through the list tonight, we have made a number of other really significant changes in the election process and the handling of the ballots and the time frames for them and who can do what. And I think they are all very, very positive changes, but they have also added to the recognition that we are modernizing our electoral system, and that in a 21st century system of voting, you need a certain set of skills there on your staffs and how your agency runs. And we're working with, we skipped the 20th century, we're sort of still working with a 19th century model of that agency. And I think people understand there's a real mismatch there. So now, of course, Gabriel, as you well know, I'm a perpetual optimist. Otherwise, I would not be starting my 20th season in Albany come January, because only insane and optimistic people are willing to stay there this long and try.
It's a show that we're very happy keeps getting renewed.
Thank you. Well, I will tell you that one of my favorite things, I have all these wonderful new younger colleagues, and they are much younger. And they get to know me for a while, and then they go, oh, you're so much more liberal than we thought. Which I think is really funny, because for years I was the crazy liberal from Manhattan, and what the hell was I doing there? And so then all these newer, DSA and, much more left, new, young people come in, and they look at my bills, and they got together and they showed up at my office and they said, we've decided that we have a name for you. You're our OG. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm old and I'm white. Translate. And they all went, original gangsta. You're our original. So now I'm the OG of the Senate, which is, I'm taking it. I like it. I was embarrassed that I had to go look it up, or I had to tell them what it meant. They had to tell me what it meant, but it's a really great group of people to work with, even when we don't agree on things. But it's sort of fascinating how things that would have been impossible 3 years ago, not only are possible, people go, that's as far as you want it to go? Are you sure? Don't you want us to go further? So there's a real rebalancing happening in that town. And I think with the new governor, we're going to see also some dramatic changes, at least in pushback from the second floor. So reporters keep asking me, how do I think it'll be different? I was like, I think civility would be so refreshing, we won't know what to do with each other.
I have one last question, then I want to open it up a little bit, which is sort of similar to the last question. But I was in a meeting with an unnamed state or city election commissioner, and I was like, look, our elections, everybody works hard, blah, blah, blah. But this was just after the New York 22nd District the counting with Tenney and Brindisi and they lost the ballots. I was like, look, I understand mistakes were made, but this is a real transparency problem. People don't know the numbers. They're following Twitter. There are rumors. So we're going to get numbers today. And the person, oh, well, whatever. People like to make trouble. So how much it sounds great that there is all this buy-in and that we are coalescing around some achievable reform options pending, future reports by the Brennan Center and others of, maybe we should focus on this or not. But how important is it to get buy-in from the current election commissioners and other people within that structure?
So
And
I
this is
think
right.
that- okay, I mean, speaking for us for New York City, I'm assuming that if we rewrite the law for the Board of Election, we will be seeing some significant change in personnel at the top of the Board of Election. And I think that is actually called for. Will we see all the commissioners? Again, I don't think I can take apart it being 10 commissioners. I'm not sure, but I don't think I can, in which case it will be 10 commissioners. But here's the question for you all, because you're actually more internal to the Democratic Party process than I am. Some of you are the elected representatives of the party. Put good commissioners in there. Get rid of, the Republican commissioner the Republican co-director who was running the Board of Election because the Democratic one was sick for so long. She was a patronage hire from Guy Villela. Now, Guy Villela went to jail like 15 years ago. Why does and he died a good 7-8 years ago. Why does he still get to pick who's running our Board of Election? I didn't know that you got to carry that through past the grave. So parties do better. It's not just how the law says things are supposed to be. It's also, are you going to take this seriously and put legitimate people who know and understand the issues, right, into these positions? Now, some people, complain to me. I think you even had some questions on chat. Well, what if you're not a D or an R? And what if you are an independent or another party? And you're right. Those are great questions that I think have to be dealt with through the Constitution. So I don't know the answers to that. But if you are going to have a system where the Ds and Rs are making all the decisions about your elections, I think it's incumbent on us, whether we are Ds or Rs, to make sure that we're putting quality people into these positions, whether they're paid or unpaid. Because otherwise you get people like Donald Trump. And I think the Republican Party has also recognized, at least the ones here in New York, that didn't go so well for them. I guess that's my answer to that one.
All right. Well, we can open it up to questions. The first question I will give to Ed Hartzog, who has a question that I don't really understand, so I'm going to let him ask it himself. And everybody, please, we'll unmute you, or you can unmute yourself for your questions, but please keep them pretty short, just so that we can make sure everybody gets to ask questions.
Thanks, Gabriel. Good evening, Senator. Good evening. I saw you the other day at the panel. I'm very concerned, and we can have a discussion about RCV. But one of the things, as you know, because we worked on the commission revising the charter here in the city about this, is one of the things in 2010, 2018, 2019, the issue was educating the voters. This seems a little bit like a seminar in graduate school. I think that a public management school can do a great case study on how the BOE fumbled the rollout of RCV in terms of managing that. As you pointed out, with the top executive gone, with the general counsel gone, all the top leadership gone, and yet they're pushing forward. That's not the point of my question. It's a very serious one. Between 2020 and 2034, the voters of the city of New York will vote every single year. And while it's great for election lawyers like myself, and I'm not complaining, it will be what I call the whipsaw. And you're talking about the And with all due respect to the fine public servants and patronage, I got my first job through patronage. So there's nothing wrong with the patronage system. I remember when I got it, the admonition was, if you blank up, you're gone. So I get it. My point is, we're going to be going in the city of New York from ranked choice voting to regular voting to ranked choice voting to regular voting every single year for 15 years, except for the years 2027 and 2031, because of a quirk in the city charter that you know of and the people on this forum know about, because of the quirk every 20 years on the city council. My point is, and with the special elections, I don't know if that's necessarily constitutional, okay, to have it. It may be, but my question is, and it was brought up very early, you're chipping away every year and the assumption that the Board of Elections is incompetent, and what will they do this year? It feeds the narrative that was spoken about earlier about the big lie. It's concerning to me because it fosters the narrative, because of New York's centrality and people focus on it. You know that they blow it up. You know today in this media world that things get skewed. My point is, how is the Board of Elections going to handle the whipsaw? How are we going to address that? And your point with all the change and everything that's happening and their inability just to run an election, can you speak to that? How are we going to deal with that? Because I shudder what's going to happen.
Thanks, Ed.
Well, I think you're making part of the argument for why we need to modernize the Board of Election and make sure that they are better prepared to do their jobs with qualified people. I guess we voted every year forever. We have our federal years and our state, and our local years. So I don't know that we're going into a period of more elections. I think that was always the case, Ed. But your point about we'll have one system for some elections and another system for another election. Yeah, I think it is confusing. Maybe the state will be willing to go the same route for other elections. It will be another step to get there for federal. That's a really interesting question. There are states where they have had local elections on RCV for quite a while. I think California, a number of cities. And so I guess they must be suffering from the same problem or not, as the case may be, in their elections. But California does really wacko things with their elections, and you can have 47 people running for governor every 10 minutes. So I think they're used to having a lot of people on the ballots there. I think we just, have to go with the flow, as opposed to say, don't go forward with ranked choice voting because people might get confused when they only get to vote for one person next year for the federal. You're on mute, so I don't know what you're saying. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, we have a few other questions, so I don't know if we'll do.
Oh, okay.
Back and forth.
Yes, to be continued.
Definitely to be continued. All right, Kim Mascaratolo, our district leader, had a question.
Yeah, hi, thank you guys so much for being here. My question was about accountability. I mean, you specifically talked about how the mayor offered to give the City Board of Elections literally millions of dollars if they would clean up their act, and they refused it. If even the mayor who's elected by the people can't compel the Board of Elections to do even the most basic changes, and you have commissioners who are appointed by party leaders who are not elected by voters, then you have essentially people in charge of elections who have zero accountability to the voters. So my question is there anything in your bill that addresses the issues of accountability so that if we see mistakes being made, commissioners can be, maybe not recalled, but, removed and replaced with others? I'm just curious about accountability measures and what we can do about that, because if there's no accountability, there's no real incentive for anybody to change.
I think that the commissioner issue and who are the, the political appointees, I'm not sure we will be able to address correctly through statute. So I think it goes to the bigger question of, how would people write it into a constitution? How would they ensure a better system? And maybe Joanna from her research can give us examples of how places have kept and respected the political issues, but still designed more responsible models. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about in terms of accountability measures. And, when we've been thinking about it at the Brennan Center, some of it goes to the structure of the board and just how diffuse the external accountability structure that governs it is. And some of this also goes to public transparency, which is a point that I want to touch on in a moment. But, I very much appreciate the point about accountability to voters, or the lack thereof, in this system. One issue, and I think I saw in the chat, someone asked, how are the commissioners appointed? How do they get their foot in the door? They're nominated by their respective county political parties, but appointed by the city council. And there are court cases in New York State that have said, well, the power to appoint includes the power to reject, but we have not seen that happen in New York City. As far as I'm aware of, I don't know of any example where this has happened. There have certainly been members of the council who said, hang on, we need a more robust process. But, one thing to note is that, traditionally appointees to the board have really just been rubber stamped. So the nominees come in, they get voted on, and that's that. We've seen the city council have some hearings in past years on nominees, but it made news in 2014, the first time they held a hearing on a commissioner nominee. And so that's another feature that the Brennan Center is really eager to see implemented, which is like, let's have a more transparent public process and a more robust way of making sure who's getting in the door as a matter of public accountability, as a matter of making this issue transparent to voters. There's also a distinction between how New York City operates and a lot of other jurisdictions with boards that are appointed, which is that in New York State, the city appoints, but only the governor has the power to remove a commissioner. And as far as I'm aware, this has never happened, ever, even though there's been a long history of mistakes and mishaps and disasters at the Board of Elections. And so another issue worth examining is, should more locally accountable leaders like the mayor, city council have a role or permission to be able to remove commissioners, because we haven't seen this happen from the governor's office, as far as I'm aware, ever. And I know this is a little bit off the topic of your question, but I did say that I wanted to talk a little bit about public transparency and the information that we can use in order to, assess the performance of the board. Looking at other major elections jurisdictions across the country, Orange County, California, Cook County, Illinois, and others, they make real-time elections data available on databases that are easily accessible by the public, easy to read, easy to understand. And one of the issues that we've heard come up over and over again from advocates in terms of holding the board accountable is that, these annual reports come out and we can't really make heads or tails of the information that we're getting about how our elections are run. And so that's just food for thought that, again, I realize is not really responsive to the question, but that I wanted to put to the group is, there's really no excuse for a city that is a leader on so many other issues, that has blazed trails in every other respect, and yet we are running, as the senator said, like 19th century style elections in a lot of ways. There's no reason, with the will to do so, to really make big changes at the board. And a lot of these are available via state statute and not constitutional changes.
All right, next question. And we have four questions in the queue, and that will probably be enough time. But if either of you have to run earlier, obviously just, speak up. I'm sure you will. So I want to spotlight, where is he? William Smith is a district leader in the 68th. Ask a question.
Thank you, Gabriel. Senator, I saw in the bill that you said that the co-executive directors would be appointed by a majority vote of the mayor, the speaker of the city council, and the public advocate. Why not a recommendation of appointment to the full city council, with them providing the full authority there?
Sorry, I was muted. So you would just have the city council deciding it, not have the others involved? Is that what you're saying?
Maybe I'm misinterpreting it. So I'm getting the impression that it would be a majority vote of, so it would be the mayor, the speaker of the city council, and the public advocate all deciding as one contingent on who would be the two designee executive
directors. Yeah.
Designate now, but that decision wouldn't then in turn be responsible for the city council to ultimately approve, or once they make that appointment, that's final?
No, I think that would be final. I think the city council now has some role in the commissioners, not the staffing. So I don't think I changed that in my bill, because I think that's where we weren't sure that there was a requirement of constitutional change. So right now, if I'm right, and somebody who works in this for the city will clarify for me, you can have recommendations for the commissioner through the county leader or the county committee. I don't know if every borough does it differently, but then it has to go through a city council process as well. So I don't change that. I'm just specifically talking about the two co-executive directors.
No, I understand that, but why wouldn't the co-executive directors have to go through the same final approval process for the whole city council to sign off on their appointment? Same way if you were to be appointed commissioner of small business services. No, strike that. I'm thinking from a congressional perspective. Sorry, if a member, president appoints someone and the Senate approves their appointment, why wouldn't the same model be applied in this instance?
Well, I hadn't thought about the question before. I think my concern would be that really does re-politicize the process by how we decide those two people. And I'm not sure that we want to re-politicize it. I think we want them to have certain qualifications and to basically get through job interviews with key people who go, yes, you seem to be qualified to do the job, and the buck's going to stop with me if I'm the mayor, if everything gets screwed up. So I want to make sure you know how to do your job, or the buck will stop with me because I'm the controller or the public advocate. So I'm not sure if it was public advocate. It might have been speaker of the city council, mayor, and controller. I have to go back and double check the bill, and somebody put it up on chat for me. I think it was 3 people, not 4. But we were trying to make sure that it was, people who had won election, but who also had accountability to the people of New York City making these decisions, but perhaps not as political as once you throw it back to 51 people to decide. And I don't even know what to do with the reality that 5 of the commissioners would be Republicans, 5 would be Democrats, because that's how it's set up. But I don't think you could even find 5 city council members who are Republicans, maybe after the last election. So you're having the Democratic city council members. I don't know, the Republican city council members. We just didn't look at it. So I can tell you that I would look at it again. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
William. The next question we'll take from Lawrence Hunt. And again, we're just running short of time, so if everybody could, we'll try to get as many questions in as we can. So thanks, Lawrence. Go ahead.
Oh, I appreciate it. I mean, I put it in the chat about the ranked choice voting. I guess really, there's a lot of confusion, uncertainty during that final week of June. I guess after the 22nd, the mayoral council races. So, what is the mood? I mean, I support ranked choice voting, but how are people really honestly responding to that now? What do they really think? What's their thinking on it since then, and about the last 2 months?
So I think that the polling right after showed that people were pretty positive about it. I don't know whether they've changed their mind in the last 2 months. I do think it's interesting that we were all incredibly aggravated that we didn't know the answers at 9:45 the night of elections, because we're so used to just closing a poll, running home and turning on New York 1 and assuming that everybody's numbers are going to pop up in 10 minutes and we know. And I've been a candidate, trust me, I know how much you want to know. But I'm not sure that it's the end of the world if it took too long, but I'm not sure it's the end of the world if it takes a few days and then they get all the numbers right and then they tell you. And I know that people said, but people want to know it's the mayor. I just remind people, under our old system, you wouldn't know until after a primary in September, perhaps a runoff in October, and then an election in November. So as much as people were aggravated at waiting time, they knew, by July, whatever date it was, where in the old system, they would have not had a primary till September, and very possibly in the citywides, a runoff in October. And I hated the runoff system because you'd have like 10 people deciding, like literally like 5% of the population would go out to vote. And that 5% would be deciding who the candidates for the citywides were. And that's not my definition of democracy.
Well, maybe Georgia changed that this past January, hopefully with any runoff when that has to be warranted.
Well, I don't think we have runoffs anymore in this city under the new system. All right, there's no model to have a runoff, I don't believe.
No. Joanna, I want to follow up on that very briefly, just because I know in the immediate aftermath, and Liz, you sort of called me out, but I mean, I was sort of conflating the two as well, as there was a lot of, ranked choice voting, but that's very different from how the Board of Elections operates the elections. Joanna, from the sort of outside advocacy and policy side, I mean, are people happy with how ranked choice voting played out, leaving aside, if we can, sort of operational failures that plagued the release of the results?
Yeah, and I have to confess that the Brennan Center actually does not have an official position on ranked choice voting, so I can't speak to it as a employee of the Brennan Center for Justice. But I would say that, again, like the biggest concern with how this all played out, first of all, I think from what I understood just as like a layperson and a voter, was that people were able to use the system, and that it was, that was not the issue here, as I said before. But I think that it's an issue of, making sure that when these kinds of problems arise, whether it's ranked choice voting, whether it's like in 2018, the machines failed because it was humid and we had a 2-page ballot, that people understand what really goes into creating these problems. It's making sure that there's protocols in place. It's making sure that people are properly trained. And these are just a couple of the problems that we see perennially exist with the city board. We didn't go deeply into training issues and things like that in our conversation tonight, but that's something that certainly from the responses that I heard, not just from other fellow voters, but from elections officials in other parts of the country that I talked to, saying, what do you think about this? Is, they saw it not as a ranked choice voting issue, but really as a, like, you got to plan better and you need to have your systems in place better.
Yeah. Cool, thanks. Meryl Brodsky, I see you have your hand up. Do you have a question, or are you just really excited to be here?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Meryl Brodsky, district leader from the 73rd AD.
Her mic is off.
Okay. I want to say that I think Liz is doing a very fine job on that bill. I read the provisions. I think first and foremost, the no reason absentee voting is a great idea. We formerly had a problem with closing of poll sites and suppression of the vote, and this opens it all up to anybody who wants to vote via mail, and the time constraints are lifted, so I commend that part of the bill a lot. And be happy to speak to it for reasons that probably listeners are familiar with. It's a good part of the bill. At any rate, the second thing is we did have a very hot contest over the commissioner, choice of commissioner between the city council and the speaker of the city council and the county. And we did in fact nominate 3 or 4 superlative people, several of whom were election lawyers with plenty of experience in both elective government and appointive government. As an ancillary point, the commissioner that we currently have on the Republican side is actually quite experienced, very nice and very good, and makes a habit of going to all of the poll sites on election day. So in Manhattan thus far, we have things so far as the new systems, the new computer systems, the new machines, the global problem of hacking, that a lot of computer scientists and encryption are currently cybersecurity issues. These things are above and beyond the purview of some of the county, how shall I say, technology. We will get there. It's inevitable, but it may take the Pentagon and NASA to do it. I think we're doing okay. I think Liz's bill has a lot of good and meritorious aspects. Also, I think that she's enhancing this election process, whereas the Democrats are clearly in the elective majority. The Republicans are pretty good when it comes to administrative things. So I'm not leaning toward changing the 2-party system in terms of how many people we can hire of each party, although as Liz kind of suggested, it is a sort of a Democratic majority when it comes to appointments. Okay, I guess the question is, does Liz think that we will be able to pass that part of the bill having to do with absentee voting?
So we've passed, quite extensions of it now twice. So I think people have really grabbed on to liking what we've done with the absentee voting. So I think the answer is yes. There's some people who want to expand it even further. And again, we sort of need a constitutional amendment to just go to mail voting, for any reason. But I think we're all seeing the value and the flexibility of allowing people to absentee vote more easily, the same as we are seeing the value and flexibility of having early voting. We're also talking about looking at, ending some of the, what I call the church pew problems that have been ubiquitous in our elections, where you show up and you're told, no, your poll site isn't here now. And so, no, you can't vote here. When we have a system now where when they find you in the poll book and they see your address, they can print out exactly what your ballot should be for you right then and there. So why do we care so much what poll site you go to? So I think there is more flexibility that can and should be built in to the bills we pass. But they
Well,
may
I frankly think that's great.
great. Good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Cool. Yeah, that is a great point, that we the lines at election places might be a little bit tempered if we could spread out a little more naturally. But I know that does pose operational challenges as well. Last question, I believe, John Wagner.
So this is a question that maybe is more appropriate for someone with expertise in human relations or human resources. But I was surprised to see the extent of the salaries that are paid both to commissioners and deputies and deputy directors in all the boroughs, which are about twice the salaries paid to the current state senators. And I wonder if that's justified by the job description.
I had no idea what they get paid.
They get paid about $230,000 a year.
Oh, I get about 10 cents an hour, I think. But it's not why I do this job. So I don't know who decides the salaries. I don't think that's statutory by the state. I would guess that's the city who's deciding that. And the commissioners are getting 230,000 a year, or the two co-executive directors?
As far as I can tell from the web, both.
I think it's just the co-executive directors.
Yeah.
So in New York, it's the local county legislatures set the salaries for election commissioners. In New York City, it is set by state statute, but it's set as a per diem because the commissioners are part-time. So I think it's $300 a day when they do the business of days that they're doing board business, and it's up to, I think, $30,000 a year. I would have to double check those numbers to be precise, but yeah, they do get per diem compensation for their part-time work.
Yeah, maybe I hit the director instead. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
No, it's worth clarifying.
It is worth clarifying. And again, one could argue that the city of New York, being one of the largest sort of voting centers in the country, these are serious jobs that require, technically skilled people who deserve to earn a significant amount of money. I never really am opposed to people earning a good salary.
All right. I do either of you have closing thoughts or any other points you really wanted to make but haven't come up yet?
I just want to thank you and tell people that if they have other concerns or proposals of what the state Senate should be doing with improving our voting systems and our election days, please feel free to feed into me. Liz at Liz Krueger is the email that probably gets to me most effectively, although there are a whole bunch of different ways to find me. And I think most of you know how to find me, so please feel free to. And we're not all going to agree on everything, but I think we have the same goals. So thank you very much for Freedoms and everybody else co-sponsoring for letting me talk tonight.
Thank you, Senator.
Yeah, I would just also like to thank the group for the lively conversation and questions. And I know that there were questions that probably came up in the chat that after, a year and change of Zoom, I'm still having a hard time maintaining keeping track of questions coming through chats while also speaking. So sorry if we didn't get to everyone's remarks, but I also wanted to thank the senator again for her leadership and attention to this issue. And we're really excited to work with you to hopefully make the system work better for others. And I guess just a last thought that I have is that, you know, we've been returning to the issue of the June primary a lot, and obviously the problems that surfaced in June were bad for voters, and we as New York City voters have had to deal with these debacles time and time again. But it's my hope that, you know, we are now seeing urgency around this issue, and perhaps the silver lining is that it's creating an opportunity for more discussions like these to have, for us to be having. And it's been so heartening to see the leadership that the state Senate is taking on this issue by holding hearings across the state, hearing from voters, and as I understand it, soon to be hearing from BOE officials and other good government folks like my colleagues at the Brennan Center and me. So we're really excited to be part of this conversation. I'm looking forward to more conversations to come.
Cool. And with that, I will thank you both again very much for coming tonight and speaking. All members and non-members can stick around afterwards. Maybe